as the investigation team of the Jiangnan District won a great victory by defeating the Corpse King near the territory of Radiant Prosperity Base. They soon found out that their mission was far from over and just got a lot more complicated. Of course, this was the first time any person or team had seen or gotten close to a Corpse King for that matter, let alone killing it, which directly caused the zombies around Radiant Prosperity Base to lose their command and become wild beasts that only act according to instinct. Some zombies ran around the base in broad daylight aimlessly. At first, the soldiers of the base were confused and surprised to find that the combat effectiveness of the zombies was sharply reduced. They no longer avoided obvious traps and direct line of fire, and as long as no one antagonized or stand almost directly in front of them, they wouldn't react or rush over without thinking. "Why do you feel like these zombies have become stupid?" Xiao Honglian asked Zhuge Qingting, even though she clearly witnessed everything unfold. Xiao Honglian couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief at this new development. Then, she ordered her men to dispose of them, and under no circumstance were they allowed to let any survive. The soldiers quickly strapped themselves with flamethrowers and released an endless sea of flames on the unintelligent zombies. Upon seeing the soldiers holding flamethrowers, the army of undead didn't even know how to dodge, and were immediately burned to death in their large numbers. "Although I don't know what happened, it's good news anyway," Xiao Honglian said with her arms folded. Her frown earlier also relaxed. Upon hearing this, Zhuge Qingting asked her with some doubts, "Could this be related to the investigation team from Jiangnan District?" Xiao Honglian thought of the members of the investigation team with terrible strength, and her expression was a little serious. "This possibility cannot be ruled out," she said. "There is a high probability that it may be related to them." Xiao Honglian and Zhuge Qingting's eyes were filled with some undisguised shock. Is this the strength of Jiangnan District? A team of only 7 people actually solved a big problem in a region on the first day they arrived in Tianhai City. And although this thoughts intimidated them, they were even more astonished by the might of the Jiangnan District. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Snow Worship Sect, their situation had not changed in any significant way, and the sect suffered another great loss. They experienced another fierce battle, and many believers died in this battle. The surrounding areas of the church had become a dilapidated scene, and the light of dawn did not bring anyone the beauty of a new day. There were broken corpses everywhere. Some of them were the sect members, and the rest were the zombies and the giant rats. These corpses needed to be cleaned up. Otherwise, they might become new zombies later on. The dead bodies had to be moved to the abandoned building behind the church to nourish the sacred tree. As a priest with a certain status in the Snow Worship Sect, Li Jian was well protected during the chaos. His family, however, wasn't. The battle was too fierce and he was separated from his family. Now he only found his wife, Zhang Jianfang, and the two of them were anxiously looking for their son, Li Kale. Where did that kid Kale go? There is chaos every day. Why doesn't he listen? Zhang Jianfang looked anxious. There were dead bodies everywhere, and she was afraid that her son was among them. Zhang Jianfang and her son could have hidden safely, but Li Kale was worried about his girlfriend and ran to find her despite her mother's objection. As a result, until now, they have not seen the shadow of Li Kale or his girlfriend, Su Beibei. The two could only shuttle around anxiously, calling their son's name. But when they both came to the corner of the ruins of a building, the scene in front of them made them feel like they were frozen, cold from head to toe. Under the shadow of the ruins, Li Kale was lying on the ground lifelessly, and his lower body was soaked with dark red blood. And beside his lying figure was the leader of the sect, Yuan Kya. Yuan Kya was kneeling beside Li Kale, holding a sharp dagger in her hand. She was staring at Li Kale's lifeless body expressionlessly, and Su Beibei was cowering in a distant corner. Li Jian's mind was blank, but the next moment, the instinct of fatherly love made him yell for his son. Lei! Li Jian immediately rushed towards the two. Yuan Kya still looked down at Li Kale, with a hint of crazy in her demeanor. Without even turning her head, she stretched out her left hand towards the approaching Li Jian. Immediately, a golden shockwave burst out from her hand. Then, accompanied with a loud boom, Li Jian felt like he was hit by a truck. He flew backwards 4 or 5 meters and then fell heavily to the ground. Seeing her husband being thrown away like a rag doll, Zhang Jianfang's face turned extremely pale. She just stood there, motionless. The entire scene was too much for her to process. Yuan Kya looked down at Li Kale and murmured, "So dirty, you need to be purified." Everything in front of them made Li Jian and his wife extremely desperate. They didn't understand why the holy leader wanted to attack their son. However, at this moment, the figure of the high priest Zhang Yi appeared there. He glanced at the scene and just frowned slightly. Then, he walked past Li Jian and his wife to Yuan Kya's side. After seeing Yuan Kya's twisted and struggling expression, he opened his wide cloak and hugged Yuan Kya into his arms. Sect leader, he whispered, his tall and lean figure encasing Yuan Kya in a tight embrace. Yuan Kya's body was still stiff, but the frenzy in her eyes immediately started to dissipate little by little until she was back to her senses. Original sin is unforgivable. I'm helping him, she said slowly in a cold tone. I know. You didn't do anything wrong. You are always right, he replied. Zhang Yi let Yuan Kya keep the bloody dagger she was holding and took her away. Li Jian and Zhang Jianfang could only watch them leave. At this moment, they were extremely angry and terrified, but they had no time to think about that. So they hurriedly rushed forward to check on their son's condition. When Li Jian got to his son, he soon found out that his son was sort of dead. Li Kale had a faint heartbeat in his unconscious state. His face was as pale as a ghost, and his lower body was covered in blood, but his upper body had no fatal injuries. Li Jian's face instantly became extremely ugly. He knew of the purification ceremony for joining the sect. It is said that many little boys who join the religion of the sect all go through this step. Before, he relied on his special abilities to serve the sect, and thought that his son could escape this disaster. But unexpectedly, this day still came. The couple were extremely sad, and the only good news was that they didn't lose their son forever. After Yuan Kya finished with her ritual, she did not forget to use her ability to stop the bleeding. Li Jian's pressing concern was how his son would face the changes in his body when he wakes up: anger, helplessness, despair, pity, and confusion. Li Jian was filled with all kinds of emotions at this moment. He couldn't figure out the real reason why Yuan Kya would do this to his son. But at this moment, Zhang Jianfang saw a trembling figure not far away. Huddled up in the shadow of a corner was Li Kale's girlfriend, Su Beibei. She curled up into a ball with a look of fear on her face, hugging her knees tightly and shaking non-stop. Zhang Jianfang thought that her son came out to protect her. Knowing this, she gritted her teeth and shouted at her. Su Beibei, what the hell is going on? Haven't you been with Kale all this time? Why was my son treated like this by the sect leader? Is it because of you? Su Beibei was already crying and looked like she was having a mental breakdown. So, facing Zhang Jianfang's questioning, she shook her head repeatedly. I didn't do anything. She lowered her head with a look of grievance and confusion. We just kissed each other after we escaped from death. And then the leader found out. So Su Beibei thought of the scene just now and became extremely frightened. I don't know why she is like that, she continued. Su Beibei then proceeds to put her head in her hands and cried bitterly. Li Jian and Zhang Jianfang saw what happened to their son. In addition to anger, they were more desperate and puzzled. Yuan Kya did this, and they have no way to even get justice or avenge their son. After all, they need the protection of the sect to survive in this icy apocalypse. What they failed to figure out was why Yuan Kya was so against romantic affection between a boy and a girl. In fact, after joining the church and learning about the special initiation ceremony, Li Jian realized that Yuan Kya was very wrong in her actions. Why would she castrate underage boys, but turn a blind eye to adult men? What is the reason? On the other side, Zhang Yi took Yuan Kya back to her room behind the church. Yuan Kya sat on her bed, hugging her knees tightly. There was a touch of weakness and confusion that had appeared on her face for the first time. She looked up and asked Zhang Yi, I didn't do anything wrong, right? That kind of thing is inherently wrong. I'm just helping them to take the right path. Zhang Yi half knelt in front of her. Then, looking up at Yuan Kya, he replied with full conviction. You're not wrong. It's all the child's fault. In the end times, love doesn't need to exist, and impure relationships between men and women should be prohibited. Sighing softly, Yuan Kya then said, They may not understand my painstaking efforts. As she spoke, she stretched out her white and tender palm to touch Zhang Yixian's face. It would be great if all men could be like you. Then, this world would no longer be so impure. Yuan Kya's cold little hand made Zhang Yixian's face more gentle. This world will eventually be as you wish. Hearing this, Yuan Kya took her hand back. Her face had regained the confidence and seriousness of her usual self. That child is Li Jian's son. He won't have any emotions, right? Zhang Yixian smiled slightly and replied, I will go and talk to him and let him understand your painstaking efforts. I think he will understand. Yuan Kya simply nodded and said nothing more. Currently, Li Jian's ability was very useful to them, so they still have to win him over. Meanwhile, inside the church, Li Kale was yelling like crazy. He even began to show signs of self-harm when he woke up. What's the point of living now? Zhang Jianfang could only try to comfort her son again and again. "Don't worry, we will work hard and live well together as a family of 3, she said. A while later, Li Jian, who had been depressed all day, welcomed the high priest, Zhang Yi. Seeing Zhang Yi, although Li Jian felt unhappy, he still forced himself to receive him. "Mr. Zhang," Li Jian said. Zhang Yi calmly closed the distance between them and gently grabbed hold of Li Jian's shoulder and questioned, "Didn't I tell you that you should address people by their titles when you are working?" Li Jian quickly changed his words and said, "Yes, His Excellency." The high priest, pleased with Li Jian's correction, Zhang Yi replied that Li Jian shouldn't mind. He had only been a member of the church for a short time, so it would take him a while to get used to some titles. Zhang Yi could see a hint of displeasure on Li Jian's face. He immediately understood that he needed a reasonable explanation. If he couldn't give Li Jian a reasonable explanation, then he might not be so dedicated in his work in the future. "Is your son okay?" Zhang Yi asked slowly. Li Jian frowned. The physical injuries has healed, but the mental injuries may never heal in his lifetime. If a man loses the essence of being a man, he will never be able to raise his head ever again. When Zhang Yi heard this, the muscles on his face suddenly twitched, and his expression became a little unnatural. He said, "It is a great blessing that your son has been purified until now, but he shouldn't do that kind of thing with a woman in front of the leader." Zhang Yixian's voice seemed to be affected by Li Jian's words, and it became a little thin. This made Li Jian feel a little strange. But soon Zhang Yixian's voice became low again. "Our snow worship sect is a large sect, with more than 10,000 followers at its peak. If it is not properly managed, unrest will easily occur. And the relationship between men and women can easily become the source of trouble. Adults are still capable of self-control, but the most worrying factor is the young and energetic people who act willfully. In the end times, all laws of order became an empty talk. Also, if they fight and kill each other for love or get pregnant unexpectedly, don't you think it will be a huge burden for the group?" He then finished off in a deep voice. "All this is for the development of the sect. You are a smart person and should understand this. Moreover, your son's matter is not intentionally directed at you, but it's the same for everyone else." After listening to this, Li Jian was silent for a long time before nodding. The high priest is right. Zhang Yi looked at Li Jian, who bowed his head and listened to the instructions, and frowned slightly. "Also, don't let this matter affect your work." Li Jian nodded again and replied that he understood. Zhang Yi comforted Li Jian, and left when he saw that his mood was somewhat normal. He knew that Li Jian could not let go of his son's matter so quickly. However, as long as Li Jian and his family were still living in the sect, they had to choose to let it go. As for Li Jian, he couldn't listen to a word of Zhang Yixian's nonsense explanation. What a stupid logic. For the stability of the sect, people have to be castrated. Then, what's the point of the sect's existence? In the future, if humans can't reproduce, then won't they perish anyway? Li Jian cursed Zhang Yixian's absurdity in a low voice. When he heard his wife crying and Li Kao's continuous painful shouting, he could do nothing. The scene shifts to the investigation team. After they successfully killed a corpse king, they also established a battle plan. That is to attract the entire Tianhai City's zombie group to one place, and then eliminate all the corpse king among them. And even if they could not eradicate all of them in one fell swoop, they can at least replicate their results in their earlier battle, and kill a large number of intelligent white-haired monkeys. Bian Junwu believes that the action mode of the zombie group is similar to that of the Zerg. The Corpse King has the ability to create new zombies, and its infection rate is much higher than that of ordinary zombies. It also has wisdom and can continuously evolve through fighting. However, as a brain, it does not have a strong combat power. So this implied that a zombie tide was needed. The first step was to use a large number of people in front to attract the main tide of zombies. Then send a part of the elite to sneak underground and decapitate the Corpse King. This is Bian Junwu's current plan. It was clear and simple, and at this moment he was currently in the process of implementing it. And that meant he had to choose a suitable location as bait. Bian Junwu held a communicator in his hand, which marked the locations of the 5 major forces in the city and the active activity directions of the zombie group. He tapped the territory of the Snow Worship Sect. Let's set the battle location here. He had 2 reasons for choosing such a location. The first was that the Snow Worship Sect had the largest number of followers, so it was the easiest location to attract the countless zombies. The second was that the location of the sect was in the middle of Tianfeng District, which used to be the most prosperous and heavily populated area in Tianhai City. So naturally, that place would have the most deaths, which in turn would have the largest number of zombies. The place where the underground corpse tide in Tianhai City was most likely to gather was also there. Yan Junwu immediately gave the order for his team to send a message to the 5 forces. The content of the message was very simple. It was to immediately gather all the combat forces to the St. John's Cathedral of the Snow Worship Sect. After receiving the order from the investigation team, the 5 forces behaved differently. Xiao Honglian was currently the biggest beneficiary of the involvement of the investigation team. She certainly knew that the investigation team must have done something, and it was very likely that it was the elimination of the Corpse King in her territory. So she replied without hesitation. Received. We will go there immediately. When Xing Tian and Wei Dinghai received the message, they were a little taken aback. And although they didn't understand the meaning of gathering at St. John's Cathedral, whether out of trust in the strength of the investigation team, or considering their background level, they had to obey the order. On the other hand, the people of the Snow Worship Sect would obviously not be happy about this matter. After Zhang Yi received the message, he hurried to find Yuan Kya to report the news. The investigation team asked everyone to gather at this location. It seems that they are going to fight a big battle with the zombie tide here. This is not good news for us. If this becomes the main battlefield, then I don't know how many of our followers will die. Many people will die again, and their gathering here is also a threat to us. Yuan Kya replied after a considerable thought. Indeed, the relationship between the 5 major forces was not harmonious, especially Radiant Prosperity Base and Morning Dew Base, who were backstabbed by them. They could secretly do something that was not conducive to the sect in the end. This made Zhang Yi ask Yuan Kya if it was better for them to move from their current location, and they needed to be quick about it. This will obviously end terribly if the investigation team and the other forces find out. Yuan Kya was silent for a long time, and then slowly nodded. Just do as you were told. But we don't need to worry too much. The gods above will bless the believers of the Snow Worship Sect. She then clasped her hands together and began to pray devoutly. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi, after receiving the news, began to think about the profound meaning behind the message. Let us gather at the Snow Worship Sect. Why not choose another place instead of that shabby place? Zhang Yi looked at the message on his mobile phone. Then, he said after a considerable thought, wait a minute, let us bring all our fighting forces. Are we going to fight a big battle with the zombies? If they are so confident about starting a war, have they found any important information? Zhang Yi then got up from his sofa and began to pace back and forth in the lounging hall. At this time, Yang Xinxin drove a wheelchair past nearby, and upon seeing Zhang Yi with a thoughtful look on his face, she couldn't help but curiously ask, "Brother, what are you worried about again?" It was at this moment that Zhang Yi noticed Yang Xinxin's presence. He then waved at her to come over. "Xinxin, you came at the right time. Come over." After Yang Xinxin came over, Zhang Yi showed her the message sent by the investigation team. Yang Xinxin lowered her eyes, and after a brief thought, she spoke in a relaxed manner. "Brother, this is good news." Zhang Yi was a bit skeptical. "Tell me in detail. How is it good news?" Yang Xinxin stared up at Zhang Yi and said, "What does the Snow Worship Sect have? Well, they are quite poor, and they have no other resources except for their large number of people." So what you're getting at is their large number of people, right? Yang Xinxin immediately nodded. Yes, their biggest feature is that they have a lot of followers. At this point, she proudly teased, this is also their only advantage. Zhang Yi couldn't help but think of the Snow Worship Sect. Their weapons and equipment are backward, and the fighting power of their followers is not strong. So when fighting with other forces, they all take the form of self-detonation to cancel their lives with others. But this barbaric and brutal fighting style also won them a living space in Tianhai City. Yang Xinxin continued, if the zombies really choose to devour people, then the large number of the Snow Worship Sect will undoubtedly attract the most zombies. The investigation team asked all the forces in the city to gather there, and also bring all their fighting power. The purpose is pretty obvious at this point. They are going to have a big battle with the zombies there. The people of the Snow Worship Sect and the people who will gather there from various forces will undoubtedly become the most conspicuous targets in Tianhai City, and they will destroy all the zombies there. Zhang Yi suddenly realized something after listening to Yang Xinxin's analysis. A light suddenly flashed in his mind. He looked at Yang Xinxin unexpectedly and said, if this is the case, doesn't it mean that they know how to deal with the zombie swarm? At the beginning, their 5-member team had witnessed the horrors associated with the zombie swarm. The zombie army commanded by the wise and intelligence-gathering Corpse King. Also, his bronze-armored corpses with fighting power comparable to that of mutants, acting as his sentinels. Zhang Yi knew how difficult it was to deal with them. Given that his team was unable to, Yang Xinshin tilted her head, relaxed in her wheelchair and smiled in a teasing manner. Since it's the investigation team sent by the Jiangnan district, their strength are naturally extraordinary. Coupled with the level of intelligence at their disposal, this result was expected. Although the time taken is a bit impressive. After all, intelligence had undoubtedly become the most important thing to have when it comes to dealing with these army of undead. Twirling a strand of her hair around her white and tender fingers, Yang Xinshin continued in her playful demeanor. First of all, big brother. They have more intelligence channels than us, and with the information provided by each of the forces, including us, their understanding of the zombie swarm is far better than ours. So they will naturally be able to find a way to deal with the zombie swarm very quickly. Zhang Yi had his arms crossed. He thought Yang Xinshin's words made a lot of sense. Speaking of which, the main reason why the previous mission was unsuccessful was that we knew too little about the underground. From the beginning to the end, we have never seen the Corpse King at all. We could only speculate through the fragment of information gathered, which inevitably led to creating an unknown fear of it. Realizing this, Zhang Yi still had to admit that the combat effectiveness of the investigation team was much stronger than his own, unfortunately. Not to mention the combat effectiveness of Bian Junwu alone. And each of his subordinates is arguably at the top level in Tianhai City. They are also not inferior to the existence of the leaders of each base, and their combat effectiveness was equally terrifying. Zhang Yi then proceeded to take a seat on the sofa and said lightly, "In this case, let's go over and see what they have in mind." Yang Xinshin agreed, pointing out that this large-scale concentration of combat power does not have much impact on them. You see, the advantage of a small number of people lies in flexibility, so it is more convenient to take the initiative to attack or retreat. In addition, without ordinary people holding them back, Zhang Yi and his team could remain calm and effective on any battlefield without any hindrance. Soon after, everyone gathered at the lounging hall, curious as to what the matter could be. Zhang Yi told them the news he'd received a while earlier. Uncle Yu, who had been accustomed to these undeniable features of war, immediately realized what the message meant and asked calmly, "Is this going to be a war? A war between the human coalition and the zombie army?" Zhang Yi leaned on the sofa. His expression was still relatively relaxed with his arms folded. Since it was a coalition, there were bound to be many cannon fodders as well. So Zhang Yi needn't need to be too nervous or wary. Also, there was an elite team like the 7-man investigation team which was more reliable. Uncle Yu's question was almost rhetorical. So Zhang Yi continued that he didn't expect the investigation team to be so fast. They've been in the city for only a day and they already had a plan. The professional team is truly amazing. Zhang Yi sighed briefly and looked at his team with a serious expression, reminding them about his paramount rule about caution and safety. They had to protect their own lives. After all, that was the most important thing. Their lives should always, without fail, be first, and everything else should be put second. Do you understand? Everyone nodded in agreement. At this point, it was obvious that they've heard this so many times that their ears were calloused. But Zhang Yi would carefully remind them before every major event. Zhou Qier frowned with some worry, and her eyes dropped slightly. Her cousin beside her also had the same look and worry as she spoke up. "In other words, you guys have to go to the Snow Worship Sect and leave us at home, right?" Zhang Yi nodded without hesitation. Non-combat personnel are not allowed to go there. If a fight really breaks out, the number of zombies we will face is unimaginable. And at that time, we will not be able to protect you at all. Thinking of the number of people that died in Tianhai City, which were more than 10 million, Zhang Yi was still a little worried. He didn't know how many dead bodies had turned into zombies. But with the 5 major forces united, they had enough strength to face all the zombies in Tianhai City. Zhang Yi also knew he had to be free of worries before he could throw himself into the battle. Zhou Qier argued desperately, "But you also need a doctor. If you get hurt, I can help you treat it." Zhang Yi deliberately kept her in the shelter in every battle he'd faced. Zhou Qier knew that Zhang Yi was protecting her, but there wasn't a single time when she was not worried, fearing that something might happen to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi raised his head and met Zhou Qier's serious eyes. She really wanted to help Zhang Yi. After all, it was obvious that in the extremely low-temperature environment outside, if someone was injured on the battlefield but did not receive timely treatment, it would be easy to die. Zhang Yi smiled disapprovingly. "You don't have the ability to protect yourself. Do you still want me to take care of you on the battlefield? Enough with this silly idea of yours. Field doctors are certainly important, but first of all, they cannot become a problem." Hearing this, Zhou Qier didn't back down and said, "If it was before, I know it would be inconvenient for you to take me with you. But since this is a big battle, we must also have sufficient logistical support. I think it wouldn't be just us. but other forces will also have their own logistical personnel to follow. Uncle Yu cut in at this moment, adding that Zhou here was right. This time, almost all the combat power of the 5 strongest forces in Tianhai City will be gathered at one location. So this battle will definitely not end so quickly. If it is a protracted war, logistics is very important, especially medical personnel. Uncle Yu continued, staring at Zhang Yi with sincerity in his eyes. In the past, due to your caution, our team has never suffered any casualties. But this situation may not continue. You should understand that it is very common to die on the battlefield. Doctors are also very important. The words of the 2 people made Zhang Yi think for a moment. Although he is very powerful, he cannot guarantee that he will not be injured in such a large-scale war. At the current ultra-low temperature of -60 degrees, any injury will turn into tissue necrosis. At the least, he will become disabled, and at the worst, he will die. If he is stubborn now, he will have nowhere to cry when he gets hurt. Moreover, even for the sake of the future, the people around him must adapt to various harsh environments. Unfortunately, battlefields were included. After thinking for a while, Zhang Yi nodded and agreed to take Zhou here with him. Then, I guess you can come with us this time. I will find a way to arrange things so you'll be in the back. You have to hide well, and come out to treat us once we get injured. Zhou Qier happily hugged Zhang Yi's neck, her eyes sparkling with joy. I understand. Thank you, Zhang Yi. I will do my duty as a doctor, she said. Seeing that Zhou Qier had volunteered, Lu Karen stood up not to be outdone. She patted her unremarkable chest and said confidently, Big brother, take me with you too. My shooting skills have been getting better and better recently. Zhang Yi looked up at the short-haired girl, a bit dumbfounded, and said lightly, Did you forget that guns are not very effective against zombies? Lu Karen's face froze. She was speechless, and her earlier confidence seems to have also vanished. At this moment, Zhang Yi didn't give anyone a chance to speak, and said directly, Except for Zhou Qier, no one is allowed to follow. The rest will stay in the shelter. Lu Karen stood there helplessly, while Yang Xinxin looked indifferent. At this time, there was not much they could do. Zhou Haimei and Yang Min flashed a look of relief in the depths of their eyes. They did not have the courage like Zhou Qier to follow Zhang Yi and the others to the battlefield. After all, they had no combat ability and it was easy to die. The best course of action was to stay in the shelter. The team planned to set off after everything was checked and ready. As for Zhou Qier, before they set off, Zhang especially gave her a small silver pistol. Guns are basically useless against zombies, and you can't use large-caliber ones. So keep this for self-defense. It's still very useful against people. Zhou Qier had practiced before, and although her shooting skills was not very accurate, it was enough for self-protection. Realizing the purpose of the gun, she took the gun and stuffed it into the interlayer of her combat uniform, although she wasn't particularly pleased with the possibility of killing someone. You see, the crisis at hand was the zombie tide, so Zhang Yi didn't trust any of the major forces. And rightfully so. After all, they were enemies just 2 days ago, and the temporary alliance was for common interest, but who knows who will stab them in the back given the chance. The team quickly set off for the headquarters of the Snow Worship Sect in Tianfeng District. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Snow Worship Sect, Zhang Yixian and several others hurriedly prepared for the arrival of the investigation team and the other forces. At this moment, Bian Junwu and his team had arrived at the headquarters of the sect. They came as soon as they could, not caring about any reception ceremony. However, when they arrived there were bloodstains, corpses, and broken limbs everywhere that had not been cleaned up. The team saw all this and were not surprised. Zhang Yixian, together with a couple of priests under his command, went to greet them. At a favorable distance, Zhang Yixian walked up to Bian Junwu and said politely, Welcome to the headquarters of the Snow Worship Sect. I wonder what the arrangements are for the sudden request for all the major forces to gather here. If we could have been informed in advance, we would have been prepared. Wu Di proudly stood behind Bian Junwu with his arms folded, and replied in a mocking tone, You guys are unable to change your situation after all this time. So, how can you be prepared? We are here to help you settle things. You just need to listen to our instructions. Hearing Wu Di's words, the faces of the people behind Zhang Yixian showed anger. Wu Di raised his eyebrows and continued with his usual taunts. What's wrong? You guys look very unconvinced? Do you want to come out and practice? I can let you all come at me together. This angered Han Chong greatly, who couldn't help but bare his teeth and reply sharply. Don't be too arrogant. Even if the people from Jiangnan district are very strong, we are not pushovers either. Han Chong, shut up! Zhang Yixian shouted, stopping Han Chong. Then, He quickly apologized to Bien Junwoo, which left Han Chang stunned. Please don't be surprised, sir. The Snow Worship Sect has suffered heavy casualties recently, and it is inevitable that the members of the sect will be a little more extreme. Wu Di wanted to say something, but Bien Junwoo tilted his head slightly, and he immediately shut up. Bien Junwoo said to Zhang Yi, "The plan will be discussed after the others arrive." Bien Junwoo found it annoying to explain to Zhang Yi alone. Then the rest later on. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Well, would you like to go inside and have a rest first?" He then extended his hand to invite the members of the investigation team to rest in the church area. Bien Junwoo stepped forward. The others followed closely behind him. Inside, Bien Junwoo raised his eyebrows slightly and asked what were the exact number of casualties the sect had suffered. Bien Junwoo was very concerned about the numbers. Only by knowing the specific death toll of the sect could he clearly understand the extent to which the Snow Worship Sect had been affected by the zombie tide. Zhang Yi was stunned for a moment and replied hesitantly, "I'm really sorry, but we haven't counted the believers. However, the estimated death toll should be 3 or 4,000. 3 or 4,000. After hearing this number, Bien Junwoo's tone was a little surprised. He looked around. The defense project was very simple, and compared with the major bases, it could not even be considered as simple. It was freezing cold, and although there were many people in the sect, they did not have so much energy to build solid fortifications. They could only rely on the existing environment to fight the zombies. And the group, which once had tens of thousands of people, only had 3 or 4,000 deaths after a long battle with the zombies. It must be said that Bien Junwoo was surprised. "So, how did you solve the food problem? To feed thousands of people in the apocalypse, you need a huge amount of food. I'm curious as to how you did it." Bien Junwoo's words made Zhang Yi a little alert and uneasy. The source of food is the core issue of any force. If Bien Junwoo was not from the Jiangnan region, he would definitely be considered to be looking for trouble if he asked this question. Zhang Yi hesitated for a moment, but still replied, "We search for buried supermarkets and shopping malls in the surrounding areas to obtain food or other survival supplies." "Oh, is that all?" Bien Junwoo looked at Zhang Yi. His eyes were invisible under the dark toad mirror sunglasses, but everyone could feel that he did not believe this BS. Because in this environment, searching for food also requires a lot of physical strength. How can the Snow Worship Sect dig out food from a depth of more than 10 meters under the snow pile, and then continue to supply thousands of people, and even a group of believers who once reached tens of thousands of people? Zhang Yi and a group of priests and fathers had some strange expressions on their faces. Everyone can see that they are hiding a huge secret about their food. The atmosphere at the scene became stiff. Bailey Chongqing and other members of the investigation team looked at Zhang Yi and others with a playful look, and they had a vague guess in their minds. And this kind of guess is not uncommon in the apocalypse. Wu Di spoke up with his arms crossed. "With nearly half of the followers dead, we can indeed feed the remaining people, right?" As soon as this was said, the people of the Snow Worship Sect were stunned on the spot. Han Chang shouted with disgust, "Don't talk nonsense. We never do that kind of thing." Dai Mei, a fellow member, also frowned and refuted, "Don't compare us with those beasts." Wu Di shrugged his shoulders and said with a slightly teasing look, "Then you can't have survived by drinking the northwest wind, right? You! That's enough! Don't talk first." Just when the two sides were about to quarrel, Zhang Yi and Bien Junwoo stopped them simultaneously. Zhang Yi took a deep breath, bowed to Bien Junwoo and said, "There are indeed some secrets in this, but this is related to the survival of our sect, so we will not be mentioning it to outsiders." "Oh really?" Bien Junwoo's voice was still cold, but it seemed to be questioning Zhang Yi. "Can't we even know?" At this time, any secret that cannot be told may be related to the corpse tide. Bien Junwoo suspected that the corpse tide was actually deliberately caused by the local forces in Tianhai City. Zhang Yi raised his head and looked at Bien Junwoo deeply. "If you really want to know, I can give you an answer." Hearing this, Bien Junwoo was satisfied with the reply, so Zhang Yi stood up straight. "Please follow me." Han Chang and Dai Mei behind him were a little anxious. "High Priest, can this kind of thing be told to outsiders?" Zhang Yi waved his hand at them. "It doesn't matter. Everyone in the investigation team is from the Jiangnan district, and they won't look down on our methods." The other members and priests under him were very anxious and unwilling to reveal the secrets of the sect, because they knew that once the secret was known to other forces in Tianhai City, it would be like a huge weakness which could be exploited by the other party. Even the people from the Jiangnan district may covet their treasure. And this particular secret was the foundation of the Snow Worship Sect's existence to this day. But Zhang Yi, as a high priest, was second only to the leader Yuan Kya. so a decision made by him could not be violated by the others present. Zhang Yi led Bian Junwu and his team to the abandoned building next to St. John's Cathedral. When they arrived in front of the building, Bian Junwu suddenly stopped and frowned. This was because the building in front of him gave him a very bad feeling. The gray reinforced concrete building pierced directly into the snow, like a coffin for a burial. This was not an abandoned commercial building. It was a huge, hideous, and terrifying monster. It was hundreds of meters high, with countless limbs dancing wildly, and there were intricate roots underground. Bian Junwu's keen intuition reminded him that it was best not to approach this place. The building in front of him was comparable to a huge, ferocious monster. But in that moment, Bailey Chongqing also came over and whispered, "Captain, what a strong smell of blood." And to this, Bian Junwu immediately agreed. After becoming blind, Bian Junwu's sense of smell became more and more acute. In front of them was Zhang Yi, who turned his head and looked at the team with a weird smile on his face. "Everyone, this is the secret of the snow worship sect. Do you still want to come and have a look?" Wu Di crossed his arms and sneered. Playing tricks, Bian Junwu remained silent and followed him in quietly. As they went deeper, they finally saw the face of the monster. The entire building was occupied by a huge strange plant. Its vines and branches covered the entire building, and the bright red branches and leaves on the walls exuded a strange dark red luster. On the branches, you can see bright red fruits. It was so fresh, so rich, not pungent, and even had a psychedelic sweetness. Bian Junwu and the others saw this scene and understood something. "Is this the food you consume to survive?" Zhang Yi reached out and picked a red fruit from the branch and offered it to Bian Junwu. "Yes, this is a mutant plant we found. We call it blood vine. It has extremely strong vitality and can absorb nutrients from everything around it, then transform it into its own vitality and bear fruit. This red fruit is our important source of food." Bian Junwu glanced at the red fruit handed to him by Zhang Yi and slowly took it in his hand. He did not eat it but observed it carefully. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Don't worry, this fruit is non-toxic. We have been eating it for more than a few months, and no one has experienced any abnormalities due to it." At this moment, Bian Junwu continued to stare at the red fruit and lightly commented, "That makes sense. But are the fruits it produces enough for thousands of people to eat?" Zhang Yi replied in a confident manner as he took a step forward. "Normal fruits are not enough, but there are ways to speed up its fruit production. For example, this." And as he said that, he pointed to the ceiling beside them. Bian Junwu and the others looked up and saw several green ellipsoid-shaped objects, similar to the shape of a cocoon, hanging on the ceiling, and had countless green branches, with its vines and leaves wrapped tightly around them, vaguely emitting a faint green glow. Upon a closer look, they actually formed a shape of a human body that seems to be unclear, almost as if it's there and not there at the same time. "Are those humans?" Meng Xiu couldn't help but widen her eyes upon realization. "You guys use humans as nutrients to make it bear fruits?" Upon hearing the question, Zhang Yi just replied with a blank and an expressionless stare, his voice devoid of any emotion. "To be precise, it is the remains of humans." Moments later, Bian Junwu and his team followed Zhang Yi to the depths of the blood vine, which happens to be inside the center of the building. Inside, they saw an extremely amazing scene. The huge space in the middle of the building has been opened up by their sacred tree, the blood vine, and the upper and lower parts have become an extremely open space, connected to the ceiling of the highest floor. The trunk of the blood vine was thick, strong, and imposing, with a majestic aura, and even had a rhythm-like breathing. The branches and the surrounding ceilings and floors were full of those ellipsoidal objects. At a glance, there were more than thousands. Zhang Yi respectfully put his right hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and prayed, "May the pioneers become the hope of the survivors, and their flesh and blood become my food." At this moment, everyone understood where the food of the snow worship sect came from. They contributed the bodies of the dead as nutrients to the blood vine. Then, the blood vine absorbs the nutrients of the dead bodies and produce fruits, which, in return, feed its benefactors. Wu Di, feeling a wave of disgust, crossed his arms and frowned. "What's the difference between doing this and eating people?" Meng Xiu, although disgusted and a bit taken aback, replied that technically speaking, there is a huge difference. At least in this way, everyone, including the blood vine, can avoid prion infection. Also, it was a lot easier to accept psychologically. Although everyone was shocked by the huge mutated plant in front of them, they did not feel any physiological abnormalities in this situation. After all, they have seen too many weird scenes. This form of handling corpses was even considered to be a good way in avoiding the corpses from becoming zombies later on. Zhang Yi turned around and said to everyone sincerely, "Everyone, this is the biggest secret of my sect, and it concerns the life and death of thousands of our followers. So please help keep this secret." Zhang Yi was not worried that the people of the Jiangnan region would be tempted by the blood vine. The unappealing and disgusted look on their faces when it comes to eating the red fruit was very evident, and the sect couldn't be blamed for resulting to such methods. After all, if there was nothing to eat, who wouldn't want to eat this kind of food? Regardless of the fruit being produced by drawing its nutrients from corpses. What's more, even if the investigation team, for some reason, coveted the blood vine with the huge size, it was difficult to move it elsewhere. Bian Junwu nodded. "Don't worry, we will keep it a secret for you." After saying that, he threw the red fruit in his hand to Wu Di next to him, and then turned and walked out. Wu Di took a look at the fruit, his face full of disgust, and then threw it to Kong Shang next to him. "You should take this unlucky thing. I don't want it either. Whoever loves it can take it." Kong Shang then threw it to Qi Guangming, and several others threw it back and forth, until it eventually ended back in the hands of Wu Di. Everyone was treating the fruit like it was some sort of plague. At this point, it was obvious that they would never eat this kind of thing. Zhang Yi showed a strange smile on his face as he stares at everyone leaving the scene. He also walked out soon after, following behind. After leaving the abandoned building, Bian Junwu found out that the people from the other forces had not arrived yet. So he proposed to meet Yuan Kya, the leader of the Snow Worship Sect. "I have heard rumors about your leader, and even some of the leaders in the district are very interested in her abilities," he said. "I would like to meet her. Please arrange it as soon as possible." Zhang Yixian's pupils shrank slightly upon hearing this. His expression was that of a surprise. The big shots in Jiangnan region were interested in Yuan Kya's ability? This was undoubtedly a very important signal. Indeed, Yuan Kya's ability was very abnormal, and she can help others awaken their abilities. In other words, if anyone had her by their side, it was equivalent to getting an endless army of mutants. However, this was also a great opportunity for the Snow Worship Sect. If they can get the support of the regional forces, then the development speed of the sect will surely become more and more terrifying in the future. Zhang Yi told Bian Junwu to wait for a moment, while he goes to inform Yuan Kya. Bian Junwu nodded. Zhang Yi walked towards the cathedral on his own. After he left, everyone stared at his departing figure with different expressions on their faces. Perhaps because of the shock brought by the blood vine. Wu Di frowned and said, "I always feel that this Snow Worship Sect exudes a sense of evil." Kong Shang also added in a deep voice, "This is not surprising. After all, any organization that exists in the form of a religion will be more or less weird." Meng Xiu held her chin in thoughts and also added her opinion, commenting that the fact that the Snow Worship Sect has been able to exist until now, and allow so many believers to survive was also a very powerful ability. Bailey Chongqing came to Bian Junwu's side. "Captain, are the higher-ups really interested in this Yuan Kya?" Bian Junwu raised his eyebrows and said lightly, "When we came here, someone mentioned that we should check her ability. If it is really as the intelligence shows, that she can make people awaken their superpowers without paying any price, then the leaders above will definitely want to get her." Upon hearing this, Bailey Chongqing just smiled and commented that that kind of ability was indeed something that people would desire. Bian Junwu slightly tilted his head to the side and gave his deputy captain a meaningful look under his dark toad-shaped sunglasses. "How can it be that simple?" "Oh, what do you mean?" Bailey Chongqing blinked and asked curiously. Bian Junwu shook his head regrettably and sighed heavily. "When people want to gain some kind of power, they need to pay a corresponding price. When we awaken our superpowers, we walk on the edge of life and death, which is equivalent to exchanging our lives for power. And her ability is said to allow people to awaken superpowers at no cost." Bian Junwu then held his chin with a slight smile and questioned, "Is there such a cheap thing in this world?" Bailey Chongqing's face also became a little serious. "I also doubt this." Bian Junwu pushed up his dark toad-shaped sunglasses and said seriously, "The higher-ups has also taken this into consideration. The military region has been doing research on mutants for a long time, and they all think that Yuan Kya's abilities are just too incredible. So this time we have to check out her abilities and see if it's as magical as the legend says." Bailey Chongqing then asked, "If it's really as the rumors say, then what?" Bian Junwu put his hands in his pockets and said meaningfully, "If that's the case, then her ability is definitely no less than that of a level 5 Epsilon mutant in terms of a strategic significance." As soon as these words came out, the rest of the team at the scene were all shocked. Epsilon. These words are heavier to render any mutant speechless. Throughout the country, there is only one Epsilon known today, and that is the mysterious existence in Shangjing district. And his or her abilities are already incredible. It is said that anyone he targets will be killed even if he escapes thousands of miles away. There is no escape when it comes to that person. There has never been an Ypsilon in the entire Jiangnan district. Bian Junwu noticed the expressions of his team and smiled faintly. I just said that there is such a possibility. But as for Yuan Kya, we don't know her ability yet, so we can't make a judgment. Bailey Chongqing nodded in understanding. So you want to meet her in person to understand her situation, right? That's right, Bian Junwu said. His words have made everyone in the investigation team extremely interested in Yuan Kya. Not long after, Zhang Yi came out of the church and invited Bian Junwu to head inside and meet Yuan Kya. Bian Junwu immediately headed towards the church alone. And right at the entrance was Yuan Kya, who was waiting patiently. When Bailey Chongqing saw the girl who was only about 20 years old and dressed in a red holy robe, he couldn't help but wondered if she was Yuan Kya, the one captain guessed to be of Ypsilon level. A few minutes later, Bian Junwu came out of the church. His face was always as cold as ice, and no one could see his emotions. Seeing their captain, Bailey Chongqing and the others rushed forward to meet him. Bailey Chongqing couldn't wait to ask, "Captain, how is it? Is Yuan Kya really an Ypsilon mutant?" Bian Junwu replied coldly, "When it comes to the judgment of mutants, I can't give an answer with my eyes alone." But he changed the subject. "There is definitely something wrong with that girl. She's definitely problematic." Everyone was surprised hearing this. Meng Xiu was the first to speak up, asking Bian Junwu what he meant by that. What was the problem? Bian Junwu pointed to his temple with his finger. "In there. She's mentally ill in there." The team was surprised with this news. The leader of such a large sect actually has mental problems? Well, this is also reasonable, Meng Xiu retorted. Seconds later, Bailey Chongqing held his chin and laughed slightly, commenting that after all, those who engage in religion were either swindlers who only loves making money or devout lunatics. Hearing this, Bian Junwu deeply agreed, and Bailey Chongqing was right. When talking with Yuan Kya, he could feel her enthusiasm for her religion. She really believed that there were gods in the world, and this surprised Bian Junwu greatly. This was definitely the reason why the other affairs of the sect had to be handed over to Zhang Yi for management. After all, a too pure believer of God, whose style of behavior is either too idealistic or too crazy, is difficult to maintain the stability of a large sect. Anyway, let's slowly consider her abilities later. After we solve the zombie problem, we still have plenty of time to do that. After all, we still have more important things to discuss with the other forces. Soon after, people from several other forces arrived one after another. According to Bian Junwu's instructions, they all brought the most powerful soldiers of their respective forces. Thousands of soldiers from the 3 major bases, a large number of convoys, and terrifying demon dogs. Zhang Yi and his team also arrived here. Zhang Yi got out of the car, then took Zhou Qir's hand and pulled her down. "Just stay with me and don't go anywhere. I will arrange a safe place for you to stay later." Facing Zhang Yi's gentleness, Zhou Qir nodded happily. "Of course, I will listen to you," she said. The two walked towards the obvious landmark building near the cathedral. On the way, Zhang Yi met his old classmate, Xing Tian. Xing Tian walked over to Zhang Yi and said hello. "Old classmate, why are you here slower than us?" Zhang Yi asked Xing Tian. Judging from the distance, the Emerald Waterside base was obviously closer than them. Xing Tian smiled disapprovingly and replied, "There were many things to deal with in the factory. We are not as carefree as you. It is indeed convenient to have fewer people." Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. The two of them exchanged a few pleasantries without much communication. Now everyone was confused as to why Bian Junwu called them over, and had no idea what to talk about. From a personal relationship perspective, they were not very close, so naturally there was nothing to talk about. Zhang Yi took Zhou Qir along as the two head inside the church with Xing Tian. The three entered the church and found that everyone else had already arrived. Bian Junwu, Zhang Yixian, Xiao Honglian and Wei Dinghai all found a seat in the church. However, there was a face that Zhang Yi had never seen before in the church. It was a woman wearing a red holy robe, wrapped up tightly. Her pious and solemn expression formed a sharp contrast with her tender face. Zhang Yi immediately guessed the identity of this girl. The only person who could still be here at this moment was Yuan Kya, the leader of the Snow Worship Sect. Zhang Yi couldn't help but stare at Yuan Kya curiously for more than expected. After all, according to legend, she has the special ability to help people awaken their supernatural powers. It was also the first time that Xing Tian had also seen Yuan Kya, and he couldn't help but say to Zhang Yi, "She is so young. She looks like a minor." Zhang Yi glanced at him, Old classmate, please be careful with your words and restrain your animal nature. Xing Tian's eyes twitched. Damn, what nonsense are you talking about? You know me. Growing up, I only like older women. Zhang Yi said lightly. I did hear that when you were working in the factory, you had a love affair with a massage parlor owner who was 12 years older than you for 8 years. The two lived in the same community for many years, so this kind of gossip naturally did not escape Zhang Yi's ears. Xing Tian's face suddenly turned red, like a cherry tomato. What do you know? I wasn't that young and she was still stunning. And we were willing. Zhang Yi glanced at him. I didn't say you were wrong. After all, lack of maternal love is not a big mistake. Xing Tian was shocked that he loudly cursed at Zhang Yi. The two of them had already approached the others while talking, and everyone stared at them coldly, so the two of them couldn't continue to quarrel. As a result, they each found a place to sit down. Bian Junwu didn't play any polite games with them or share any pleasantries. He directly stood in front of everyone present and told them what happened the day before. Last night, we killed a corpse king. Turns out that when the corpse king is killed, the entire zombie group will be out of control. And the rat group that accompanies the zombie group will become headless flies. Therefore, the key to solving the zombie problem in Tianhai City is to kill all the zombie kings who control the zombies. Hearing that the investigation team killed a corpse king so quickly, everyone's eyes showed a touch of shock. Zhang Yi thought, sure enough, they have found a way to deal with the zombie group. Even though it was expected, Zhang Yi was still surprised by the high efficiency of the investigation team. After all, they once went deep underground and tried to kill the corpse king. But in the end, they failed. Only Xiao Honglian showed an expression like she already knew this. And she did, obviously. Xiao Honglian knew that the corpse king that was killed the day before must have been operating near her base. Xing Tian asked curiously, what exactly is a corpse king? Can you tell us in detail? Of course. Bian Junwu still needs their help to eliminate the zombie group, so naturally he would not conceal this information. After Bian Junwu finished speaking, he picked up a black body bag lying near his feet and placed it in an open space in front of the church. He stretched out his hand and unzipped it, and a humanoid corpse covered with white hair appeared in front of everyone. This is it. This is the corpse king. Bian Junwu pointed at it and said to everyone. Everyone stood up and came to the front of the corpse king. When they saw the mysterious corpse king, everyone's expression was a little disappointed. They thought that the corpse king would be a more mysterious and terrifying creature. But now it looks ordinary. It was just like an ordinary corpse of a monkey with white hair. Zhang Yi proceeded to ask if the corpse king was powerful. And Bian Junwu replied, the corpse king can control the corpse group, and its wisdom is relatively high, probably similar to that of humans. But its own combat power is very weak. Zhang Yi nodded, and he was relieved. As long as the combat power is not particularly strong, it will be much easier to deal with. He once thought that the combat power of the corpse king was much stronger than that of the bronze-armored corpses. If that was the case, it would have been very difficult to deal with. It sounds a bit like an insect swarm. The mother body has wisdom and can breed more zombies, but it does not have much combat power itself, he said. Xing Tian glanced at him. Why? Do you still hope that this thing is very powerful? If it was a little more powerful, we would have been finished long ago. This is the truth. Fortunately, the corpse king has a huge weakness. Otherwise, if the combat power of the corpse king itself is very strong, coupled with the large number of bronze-armored corpses, then the corpse swarms and rat swarms it controls, the forces in Tianhai City will not be able to stop their attacks at all. Fear comes from the unknown. After knowing the true face of the corpse king, everyone's fear has faded a little. But Zhang Yi did not relax too much. If this is the corpse king, then there must be more than one in the entire Tianhai City. Moreover, where did the corpse king come from? If this is not cleared, then the situation cannot be completely resolved. At this time, Bian Junwu told them how to kill the zombie king. Zombies appear every day and attack humans. But the corpse king itself is relatively fragile and will not come out, but hide deep in the subway tunnel. Therefore, someone needs to attract the zombie army outside. Then a part of the elite will go deep into the subway tunnel and kill the corpse king to solve the zombie tide problem. Without the command of the zombie king, these zombies are easy to deal with. Even if there are more zombies, they will not be a big threat. Zhang Yixin suddenly realized after hearing this. So what you mean is that you want to use our entire snow worship sect as bait? To attract the zombie hordes to attack? And then you go underground to deal with the corpse king? Zhang Yixin's eyes showed a fierce look, and Yuan Kya's eyes also had the same fierce expression. They were obviously against the idea, and upon hearing this, Wei Dinghai couldn't help but laugh, mock and ask Zhang Yixin and Yuan Kya in a teasing manner, shouldn't you two be so excited? Looking at the entire Tianhai City, you have the most people from your sect. So it is reasonable to choose this place as the battlefield. Facing Zhang Yixian's question, Bian Junwu replied expressionlessly, although it seems a bit cold-blooded to say this. But in fact, there are indeed considerations in this regard. What's more, you don't have any perfect protective equipment like the other 4 forces. But you don't have to worry too much, because now you have the armed forces of the other various forces here to guarantee your safety to the greatest extent. Zhang Yixian gritted his teeth and said word by word as he clenched his raised fist tightly. But won't all the zombies in the entire Tianhai city gather here? Bian Junwu just adjusted his posture and replied coldly and calmly. If it is really as you just said, that would be the most ideal result. We all hope to solve the zombie problem in Tianhai city once and for all. Zhang Yixian suddenly raised his voice and shouted angrily. What about our sect members? What do you think of their lives? At this point, Xiao Honglian cut in, adding her thoughts and questioning Zhang Yixian with a playful look. Zhang Yixian, it's time for you to be more rational, she said. Why don't you think about it carefully? If the people in Jiangnan district don't use this method to deal with the zombies, then, with time, won't your snow worship sect disappear from the map anyway? She spread her hands and continued lightly. Even if we, the other forces, are at the end of our ropes, we still have one last option. Our last resort, and that is to completely seal our people in our shelters. With those military-level equipment in our facilities, no matter how many zombies there are, they won't be able to break through. But what about you? With so many of you relying on such crude fortifications, do you really think you can hold out for long? Although Xiao Honglian's voice was a little sarcastic, her expression was serious, because everyone present could understand that what she said was the cruel truth of Tianhai City. If there was any force in Tianhai City that would undoubtedly disappeared first because of the zombies, it would definitely be the Snow Worship Sect. Zhang Yixian's face became even paler as he turned his gaze towards Xiao Honglian, and replied desperately, "That's not a reason to use my people as bait." Bian Junwu took a few steps forward, closing the distance between himself and Zhang Yixian, and in his usual cold tone, he finally spoke up. Why can't you people from the Snow Worship Sect be used as bait? Zhang Yixian and Yuan Kya were stunned when he said this. Why can't they be used as bait? Can such a question be asked directly? They both wondered. Let me ask you then, do you have a better solution? Bian Junwu questioned. He stared intensely at Zhang Yixian and said coldly, "We have traveled thousands of miles from Jinling to come here to face the zombie crisis with you. Now all 7 of us are here. The entire armed forces of the other forces are also here. If you say that your congregants are bait, then why are we not also considered as bait? Did I let you face this crisis alone?" Bian Junwu's sonorous and powerful words directly made Zhang Yixian speechless. That's right. Bian Junwu and his people have no grudges against the Snow Worship Sect. They didn't come all the way here to find trouble. Instead, they came to help the local forces in Tianhai City to solve the zombie crisis. Zhang Yixian continued to grit his teeth. Although he could understand Bian Junwu's choice and thought process, his expression was still somewhat indignant. At this moment, Zhang Yi slowly stood up and said, "You have to know that we, the combatants, are the ones guarding the front line. Even if we have to die, we will die first." Zhang Yi took a moment to look at each leader of every base, before finally settling his serious gaze on Zhang Yixian. "We have so many armed forces, all of which have come to protect your followers. What else are you dissatisfied with?" Of course, Zhang Yi was just saying polite words. You see, if an accident really happens at that time, the others will be reluctant to escape because their respective armies are too large. But Zhang Yi and his team have few people, so they have no scruples. Zhang Yixian's expression was a little struggling. He seemed to understand that they had no right to refuse this matter. Bian Junwu explained to him, which was already giving him face. So he finally gave in helplessly and asked through his gritted teeth. "Okay, I understand. But Mr. Bian, you must give us a convincing battle plan." Seeing Zhang Yixian's compromise, Bian Junwu pushed his large dark toad-shaped sunglasses. "Don't worry. I've already thought of the battle plan. The basic planning method is similar to surrounding the corpses and attacking for reinforcements, but now it seems that it is more like surrounding the food and attacking for reinforcements. Since the opponent they faced this time was a creature with low IQ, it was relatively simple to formulate a battle plan." Bian Junwu, who had mastered the structure and habits of the zombies, already had a complete battle plan. He immediately explained his ideas to everyone. First, after everyone had gathered at the Snow Worship Sect, they would attract all the zombies in Tianhai City to gather there. Due to the numerous directions at which the zombie tide will attack, all the 5 major forces would defend around the Snow Worship Sect, and lure the zombies underground to attack also. And when they do, Bian Junwu and his entire team would form a decapitation team to go underground and kill the Corpse Kings. They had already succeeded in this plan once, proving that it was indeed feasible. Bien Junwoo said this, and rarely pulled the corner of his mouth into a smile. Everyone thought this plan was a cold joke. Good fellow, you want us to be food to attract zombies, right? Zhang Yi thought with his arms crossed, an ugly, dejected expression written all over his face. Xing Tian, on the other hand, crossed his legs and asked incredulously, "Is that it? This is the huge trap? Just waiting for the zombies to jump in?" Bien Junwoo's expression was very calm, but full of confidence. After all, it is a group of creatures with low intelligence. As long as we find the right method, it is not that difficult to deal with. Bien Junwoo said it very easily, but everyone present felt a huge pressure. Zhang Yi suddenly spoke up at that moment. It sounds quite simple, but if all the zombies in Tianhai City are attracted here, how many will there be? Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? Or millions? Relying on us, relying on an almost dispensable defensive fortification to block it. The pressure is not ordinary. Although Zhang Yi was not afraid of the zombies, they would be unimaginably outnumbered. And as the saying goes, an ant might be at the bottom of the food chain, but too many ants can bite an elephant to death. Zhang Yi knew that without the solid defense of his shelter, it was not his strong suit to fight in the streets or in the tall buildings in the city center like the snow worship sect. Bien Junwoo stood tall with his arms folded, and replied, "When the time comes, you will need to fight to the death. After all, this is for your own city." Bien Junwoo's words were correct, and he couldn't say anything else. After all, Tianhai City is their territory. After solving the zombie crisis, the 5 major forces would obviously be the biggest beneficiaries. Zhang Yixin looked at everyone present with suspicion and said coldly, "I'm afraid that some people will deliberately let us unprotected, causing our snow worship sect to suffer heavy losses. What should we do then?" Xiao Honglian looked at Zhang Yixin with disdain and sneered. "Zhang Yixin, please stop being suspicious. When that time really comes and the zombie army attacks, who could dare not act accordingly and let your sect face everything alone? Isn't that courting death?" Zhang Yixin thought about it, and it was indeed as Xiao Honglian said. Even if they wanted to let the sect face this demise alone, the rest of the forces would eventually face the same in the future. It was evident that everyone present was counting on this plan to succeed in the end. Bien Junwoo looked at everyone and asked, "So, do you still have any opinions?" Upon hearing the question, no one had any opinions or objections to add. After all, this city was their home and the zombie tide was primarily their battle to begin with. At this moment, Yuan Kya, who had not spoken, said slowly, "While attracting zombies, I hope to protect those who have no fighting ability, especially the children." Yuan Kya had a point. After all, the followers of the snow worship sect were not afraid of death. If necessary, they could sacrifice their lives to fight for their beliefs. But there are still many women and children in the sect, and they neither had the ability to fight, nor could they be just left unprotected for the zombies to tear them apart. When it comes to children, a strange look appeared on Bien Junwoo's face, but it disappeared in an instant. "No problem. Where is the safest place here? You can make room for children who can't fight. People under the age of 14, excluding 14, can hide there. As for the others, they have to assist the army in defending against the zombie tide. Only those young children can hide in this safe place, and others are not allowed, because others need to be used as bait to attract the zombie tide." Yuan Kya replied that they would use this very church as a place of refuge, since the St. John's Cathedral was located in the center of the entire sect area and is also the safest area. Yuan Kya then clasped her hands together and began to pray devoutly at the cross hanging above the altar. God will protect his devout people. After talking about almost everything, Bien Junwoo began to arrange the defense line. In the 4 directions of southeast, southwest, northwest, and northeast, the 4 forces were responsible for defending 1 direction each. And although Zhang Yi's team were of only 5 combatants, they were all elite, so no one doubted their ability to guard their section assigned. Everyone had no objection to this, but they just had some arguments about the defense work between each other. If that got settled, then they could finally determine their defensive plan. Bien Junwoo distributed communication devices to everyone. This was an advanced communication device that could directly contact the Nebula satellite system. Even in a very harsh environment, the communication effect can be maintained. On the battlefield, communication was very important. This device can ensure that the 5 forces could communicate in time and cooperate. This battle may be a bit long, and it won't be over in a day or 2. Everyone should be prepared for a protracted war. Bien Junwoo reminded everyone. In fact, he didn't need to say it. Everyone knew this. They all knew that they were going to live in that area for the next few days. And as for rations, Zhang Yi wasn't bothered. Although the living environment was much worse than the shelter, they can rest in their vehicle. His team also had enough food, and the vehicle's heater was enough to provide them with warmth, so it was not particularly difficult. After discussing for several hours, everyone finally reached a consensus. Zhang Yi thought of Zhokir, and he immediately had an idea in his mind. If the time comes, Zhokir would stay in the church and be under the protection of Yuan Kya. And as the leader of a force, he still has the power to arrange such a thing for a person. After the meeting, he approached Yuan Kya with a smile. "Miss, I have to trouble you with one thing." Yuan Kya raised her head and turned towards Zhang Yi. Her pupils were deep and bright, bottomless but as bright as the night sky, giving people a feeling of sinking. Although she had been expressionless and rarely spoke even in the meeting, it was difficult for Zhang Yi not to notice the nominal leader of the snow worship sect. Zhang Yi was full of curiosity about Yuan Kya and her abilities. But now wasn't the time to indulge in such curiosity. Before Yuan Kya could speak, Zhang Yi quickly stood between the two. He looked at Zhang Yi calmly with a programmed smile on his lips. "Mr. Zhang Yi, I don't know what's wrong with you or what you want, so just tell me and I'll help you. My leader is devoted to serving the gods and won't be distracted by other chores." Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. Isn't Zhang Yixian's desire to protect Yuan Kya too strong? There must be something fishy between the two of them. Maybe they are a couple. Zhang Yi was very dissatisfied with this, but he didn't care about other people's private lives. So he said, "Well, it's like this. Among the people I brought was a doctor with excellent medical skills." Zhang Yi paused momentarily, then seconds later he continued with a serious tone. "She is my girlfriend, but she is not a mutant and has no fighting ability. So I hope to let her stay with your leader lady. How about it?" Zhang Yi frowned with some displeasure when he heard the title leader lady. So he asked Zhang Yi in a respectful manner to be careful about how he addressed his leader. Sorry. I thought people who serve the gods did not care about the red tape of the secular world." Zhang Yi smiled with sarcasm in his words as he nervously scratched the back of his head. Zhang Yi did not want to have a conflict with Zhang Yi. Among the major forces in Tianhai City, he was most afraid of the mysterious Zhang Yi, not the other three with large armed teams. And after he destroyed West Mountain Base and went toe-to-toe to repel the coalition forces of the other forces, Zhang Yi could not judge Zhang Yi's background. At this time, Yuan Kya stepped forward and said slowly, "Of course. At this time, Mr. Zhang can still let his girlfriend come to the battlefield, which shows that you attach great importance to this battle. You even let your girlfriend risk her life. Besides, doctors are very important support staff. Let her come to the church and stay with us." Zhang Yi looked at Yuan Kya and said with a smile, "Looks like the leader is still reasonable. Well, this matter is settled then. And since she will be here, I will do my best to protect the safety of the church. So this is a good thing for everyone." After that, Zhang Yi turned and left the church. Yuan Kya and Zhang Yi stared at Zhang Yi's back. Their eyes were meaningful, especially Zhang Yi, who still looked at Zhang Yi with a hint of fear. He is really the biggest destabilizing factor in Tianhai City. I hope he won't become our enemy, Zhang Yi murmured to himself. This was the reason why Zhang Yi was intimidated and wary of Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's rise is too incredible, and most importantly, everything he does is extremely surprising as well. His life before and after the apocalypse were extremely far at both ends not to notice. Unlike other base leaders, Zhang Yi left the church and was about to go back to find Zhokir and the others to tell them the results of the meeting. But at this moment, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Zhang Yi subconsciously looked over to his side, and the man also looked back. Their eyes crossed in the air, and Zhang Yi immediately raised his eyebrows, a little surprised. "Li Jian?" Zhang Yi saw a skinny middle-aged man wearing black-framed glasses, passing by the church with a tired look. When Li Jian saw Zhang Yi, a flash of surprise flashed in the depths of his eyes. But soon he turned his head and walked away as if he didn't know Zhang Yi. "Li Jian? Why is he here? And wearing the clothes of a snow worship priest?" Zhang Yi thought they had long been eaten by zombies in Yuelu community. But how wrong he was. Anyway, he didn't care too much. After all, he and Li Jian were not very familiar with each other. Zhang Yi came to where they parked their vehicle. Zhang Yi walked up to the others and told them the content of the meeting. After listening to it, everyone was not too surprised. After all, when they came, they also guessed that this would be the result. They just didn't expect that they might have to live here for a while. There will naturally be some inconveniences. So Zhang Yi asked everyone to make do with it temporarily. He will also get 2 cars to use as washrooms. One for men and one for women. After all, they were not short of resources, so there is no need to make their lives too hard. Zhang Yi said as he looked at Zhokir. You can rest with Liang Yu in the car first. Then, I will take you to the church after the battle begins. The leader of the snow worship sect is there, and they will definitely fight to the death to protect their safety if it comes to it. If we need treatment, we will come to you." Zhokir nodded. "Okay, no problem." This was the first time Zhokir had participated in such a large-scale war, so she was a little nervous and a little excited. She felt that she could finally use her abilities and prove her worth. In the future, they may face more crisis. So the sooner she goes to the battlefield and adapt to this environment, the more she can help Zhang Yi. In addition, there are a few more things I want to tell you. Zhang Yi's tone became a little low, and his face became serious. Seeing Zhang Yi's serious demeanor, Zhokir blinked and straightened her posture. Zhang Yi had her undivided attention. Zhang Yi turned his head from left to right and right to left, looking around, and after confirming that no one was nearby, they both went inside the vehicle. After closing the car door, he said to Zhokir that Yuan Kya is not an ordinary person. She can help people awaken their superpowers, but I am not very confident in her abilities. First of all, remember that once she offers to help you awaken, you must refuse. Do you understand? Zhokir lowered her eyelids, pondered for 2 seconds, and then slowly nodded. Zhang Yi knew that Zhokir was a little disappointed. Zhokir also hoped that she could become a superhuman, so that she could help Zhang Yi more, instead of just praying silently at home for Zhang Yi's safe return as in the past. But since her man said so, she would listen to his instructions honestly. Zhang Yi delicately touched her face, stared into her eyes and reminded her carefully, "There is no free lunch in this world. All the gifts of fate have been secretly marked with a price. So you must not be greedy for small gains, otherwise you will suffer a big loss sooner or later." Zhokir smiled sweetly. "I'll remember it. Look at you. Are you so worried about me?" Zhang Yi smiled. "It's not that I'm worried about you, but I care about you too much." You see, Zhang Yi and Zhokir met the earliest in the apocalypse, and the two have been together for almost half a year. Although at the beginning, Zhang Yi only saw Zhokir as a tool, only for her usefulness as a doctor and as someone to satisfy his sexual needs when he was lonely and cold. But as of now, things had changed drastically, and he had come to care greatly about Zhokir. Although it was not love, it was somewhat close to it. So if there's a possibility that Yuan Kya's ability could endanger her life, Zhang Yi's standard was to eliminate that possibility. When the others outside saw the two showing off their affection towards each other, Uncle Yu and Chunlei had a playful look on their faces. But Liang Yu couldn't help but turn her head uncomfortably to the side with a strange expression. Back inside, Zhang Yi continued that in addition to what he said, there was another thing Zhokir needed to do also. She needed to keep an eye on Yuan Kya. Zhokir tilted her head. "Do you think there is anything wrong with her?" Zhang Yi thought for a while and replied, "Her existence itself is a big problem. In short, you should pay more attention to all her actions in secret, and tell me when the time comes. You see, Yuan Kya's ability, blessing, was too abnormal, and as long as she can attract enough believers, she can create a large-scale mutant army. Such a person, Zhang Yi believes anyone would naturally be afraid." But Zhang Yi couldn't tell why he felt strange about her. Maybe it was just out of caution, and he was vigilant to all possible powerful enemies. But there was something odd and ominous about her. This was nothing but a gut feeling, okay? I understand. This task was not a big problem for Zhokir. When Zhang Yi finished chatting with Zhokir, he decided to scout the Sect's perimeter for an advantageous position for the battle. On his way, someone called out to him from behind that made him turn his head. Zhang Yi questioned what his old classmate, Xing Tian, was doing. "Are you following me?" Xing Tian replied leisurely. "Everyone is busy setting up their defensive lines, and we don't know when the zombies will come. You should also quickly familiarize yourself with the environment." Zhang Yi smiled and asked, "You are really concerned?" "Of course." Xing Tian looked into the distance at the defensive line that his team was responsible for. "I brought all my old tricks with me. We can't afford to lose this battle." At this point, he suddenly gritted his teeth with a serious expression. "Damn it. I hope that old guy Bian Junwu doesn't play tricks on us." Zhang Yi exhaled deeply through his nose and patted him on the shoulder. "Do your best. As of now, it seems that we have no better way except to trust him." Zhang Yi began to familiarize himself with the environment and the perimeter of the entire sect, especially around St. John's Cathedral Church. As the leader of his team, he needed to support the weakest link at any time, which implied that he needed to understand every place that a member of his team would be. Then he can exert his ability according to the environment of the battlefield. He soon found the best defensive position at a single glance, and this was the abandoned commercial building next to St. John's Cathedral. It is more than 100 meters high and located somewhat behind the church, which was at the center of the sect. Its high structure was also convenient for him to command the battle of his team. And as long as he goes there, he can look down from a high place and rely on his abilities to defend all areas with a radius of about 4 kilometers. Also, if they were to lose this battle, he needed to grasp the trend of the battlefield in time to facilitate his escape together with his entire team. In order to efficiently deal with the zombies, especially the bronze-armored corpses, Zhang Yi asked Lu Karen to build a new type of bullet for him. A batch of large-caliber armor-piercing bullets for anti-materials were specially equipped. The penetration of the bullet was reduced, and it could explode, blowing any undead body to pieces after shooting into it. This made it easier to solve the zombies one by one with a large-caliber sniper rifle and explosive bombs. However, when Zhang Yi came to the abandoned building to inspect, plan and make some necessary arrangements on the top floor, he was surprised to find out that there were several Snow Worship Sect mutants blocking his way very cautiously, and were not allowing him or any unauthorized personnel to enter the building. "This is the forbidden area of our Snow Worship Sect. Please leave," a Sect mutant guard, who was blocking Zhang Yi, said with a serious expression. "Forbidden area?" Zhang Yi showed a playful smile on his face. This term made him feel a little funny. Have you read too many martial arts novels? After all, the Snow Worship Sect was established only a few months ago. This commercial building had nothing to do with them before. How come it has become a forbidden area now? It is inconvenient for us to explain this to you, Mr. Zhang, so please do not embarrass us, the Sect mutant guard said with a cold face. Zhang Yi and his companions immediately realized that there was something fishy in that building. You see, before they got there, they encountered several Sect members whose attitude were very firm, and they were covertly warning Zhang Yi and his companions not to approach the building. But the more they did this, the more curious Zhang Yi became. However, he was unwilling to start a conflict with the Snow Worship Sect for his curiosity, so he smiled and said it was fine. "The guest follows the host's wishes," he said. "So, I will change places." Okay, this was a commercial district, so there were many high-rise buildings. Changing one will not make much of a difference. But this matter aroused Zhang Yi's strong interest. He likes to find out other people's secrets the most, because that might determine the survival of almost anyone in this apocalypse. Zhang Yi changed to a building next door. Zhang Yi and his entire team, including Zhokir and Flower, climbed the flight of stairs to the top of the building step by step. The height was more than 30 floors, and this made everyone a little breathless. Among the group, Chunlei was completely exhausted halfway up, and had to rest to follow the group at the end. Uncle Yu spoke up and asked Zhang Yi, "Can't you just use the double doors to cross this space? We have to climb up step by step. How troublesome." Zhang Yi turned his head with a smile. "When there is no one in the dark, I will use the double doors to move. But this ability cannot be easily exposed." Hearing this, Uncle Yu sighed. "You are too cautious." Zhang Yi's vigilance had not decreased at all, even though the major forces were currently cooperating. They soon got to the top, and Zhang Yi was able to observe the entire sect from this view. Sure enough, his choice was not wrong. From this angle, his shooting can cover the area with a radius of 3.5 to 4 kilometers centered on this place. Within this range, except for some blind spots in front, his bullets can snipe at any point. At least, he can cover the range outside the 4 lines of defense. "Okay, I'll defend here, and you guys can stay in this building. After all, we don't have to fight on the front line anyway, so we can adapt to the situation." Meanwhile, Li Jian, who quickly left after meeting Zhang Yi, was in thoughts. On the way back, he was a little uneasy, and he was hesitating whether to tell Zhang Yi what he knew. Then, pray that Zhang Yi could have some sympathy, and take their family away from there. But after thinking about it carefully, he denied the idea, because Zhang Yi was not a selfless saint. It was impossible for others to take them in for no reason. In this apocalyptic world, you can only rely on yourself and not blindly trust others. When Li Jian returned home, Li Kale's injuries had long recovered, but his mental state was very problematic. Having lost his manhood, the once energetic and cheerful boy had become so depressed that he had become a shell of himself. He hid himself in his tent and refused to come out or let anyone in. He even refused to eat the food brought to him. This worried Li Jian and Zhang Jianfang greatly. Li Jian walked over and tried to persuade Li Kale to leave the tent and take shelter in the church. "Son, there will be another war here soon, and the battle is not small. It's very unsafe here, and the zombies may come at any time. Come with me." Inside the tent, Li Kale didn't react at all when he initially heard his father's voice. But when he heard that they would be going to the church, he suddenly yelled like a wounded beast. "I'm not going. Go! All of you, go and leave me alone. And where's Su Bebe? She dislikes me, right? That must be the case. I haven't seen her. Upon witnessing this, Li Jian was speechless and helpless. He took a few steps backwards, not knowing what to do or say. He rightfully blames the sect for his current situation of his son and family. This snow cult has turned my son into what he is now. It seems that there is no point in staying any longer, he thought. On the very first day, no zombies appeared in the area around the snow worship sect. And soon, nightfall descended. Some guards take turns on duty at night to prevent zombies from attacking at night, while the others rest. Very soon it was midnight, and Zhang Yi, who was resting in his car, suddenly opened his eyes. He sat up, fully awake, and behind him in the back was Uncle Yu and Chunlei, competing on who could snore the loudest. Zhang Yi carefully observed the outside perimeter through the car's window. Even at midnight, there were still people patrolling the camp, but most people had already rested. Especially the building that outsiders were forbidden to approach, there were many guards around it. After the people of the other major forces gathered here, the sect had also increased its security level at that particular building. Obviously, there were major secrets of the snow worship sect hidden there. Their vehicle was parked in front of the building selected by Zhang Yi, which was also opposite to the abandoned commercial building. After observing the scene for a while, it was pitch black inside, and every window was blocked by something, so he couldn't see the situation inside at all. The building felt like a cement coffin. What is hidden inside? Zhang Yi's curiosity was piqued, and with the ability to travel through space without regard for spatial obstacles, he couldn't help but had to investigate. After Zhang Yi calculated the distance, he opened the double doors that went directly from his vehicle to the inside of the building. The double doors led directly to the upper floors of the building first. Zhang Yi concluded that even if there were people defending the building, it would be impossible for them to be at the upper floors. And he was confident in this reasoning because he had been observing the situation in the building all day. Although there were people constantly entering and exiting the building all day, they didn't stay for long, and they came out with a few carts. Zhang Yi judged that the place might be the sect's warehouse. The distance between the two buildings was less than 300 meters, so Zhang Yi went through it directly. The next moment, he walked out of another door and appeared in a room in the abandoned building. The darkness around him had little effect on him because it wasn't pitch black. Zhang Yi could see everything, although not as clearly as during the day. Zhang Yi looked around, and there was a look of surprise in his eyes, because he discovered at a first glance that the room in front of him was filled with vines and branches of plants. So much so that vines were crawling under his feet. Plants? Are they mutant plants? The walls, ceiling, and floor of the space were covered with vines and branches of plants. And it was these things that covered the window. Zhang Yi wondered if perhaps the body of this plant is as big as the entire building. Is this the secret of the forbidden area of the snow worship sect? But what is this plant used for? Provide food? Or does it have other functions? Zhang Yi thought to himself. This was the first time he'd seen such a huge and strange plant. He wondered how it was possible, but thinking about Flower and the huge white wolfhound at the Emerald Waterside base, he immediately realized that this plant was no different. Not to mention that plants have unlimited growth capabilities. Although he didn't know what the thing in front of him was, he wasn't going to leave empty-handed, given he'd gotten an excellent opportunity to learn the secrets of the snow worship sect. Zhang Yi murmured something under his breath, and suddenly, a sword rang out from Zhang Yi's right hand. He had activated his supernatural ability, which increased his body speed and reaction ability by 8 times. And after a long period of private training with Liang Yu, his close combat strength has also improved greatly. The key was to strengthen his supernatural power and use it, if possible, to enhance his weapons also. With this, even if he encounters an enemy in such a narrow environment, he can react quickly. After a couple steps forward, Zhang Yi came across the door of the room, which was blocked by extremely large vines. Aware that it was a mysterious plant obviously related to supernatural powers, Zhang Yi decided that it was best not to touch it with his hands. Instead, he cut a hole in the wall of vines with his sword and walked through. When he came out, he was shocked, because the center of the entire building was actually dug into a sinkhole, and under his feet was the corridor, which was destroyed and occupied by its roots. Zhang Yi was amazed by the size of the huge dark green plant, which rose from the deepest part of the building like a towering sky, and went straight to the ceiling of the top floor. Is this thing a world tree? He thought. Obviously, the plant in front of him was not that kind of thing. Although there were trees that were even bigger than it in the past, Zhang Yi knew that this huge plant was definitely a mutation, and it had grown to such a size in just a few months. The most bizarre thing was that it was blood red all over, and the tree had a rhythm like human breathing. Under the black bark, the lines showed the bright red of human flesh and blood. It was as if this was not a tree, but a living person. Zhang Yi couldn't help swallowing his saliva. He didn't know whether this mutant plant was aggressive, so he was cautious and didn't dare to make a sound. Then, he carefully observed the surrounding scene. The vines and branches that covered the entire building, and the branches had many fist-sized bright red fruits. The leaves curled into ellipsoids which hung on the walls and roofs like insect eggs. No one knew what was inside. The scene in front of him was full of mystery, and in such an environment, people couldn't help but feel creeped out. Zhang Yi took several deep breaths in a row to calm himself down. He began to think about the situation in front of him. There was no doubt that he had discovered a huge secret of the snow worship sect. Then the choice came. Should he watch the excitement, pretend nothing happened and leave, or collect the fruits and branches, open the giant insect egg-like thing and take a closer look? This is a very difficult choice. Once discovered, it is very likely that the people of the snow worship sect will fight him to death. But now, will the snow worship sect dare to fight him to death at such a critical moment? Zhang Yi thought about it again and again, and finally he didn't want to miss this opportunity. So he walked over and picked 2 bright red fruits from the branches. While picking, he carefully observed the reaction of the giant plant. After seeing that it was normal, Zhang Yi was relieved, and then cut some branches and took down a few leaves. Seeing that nothing unusual had happened, Zhang Yi raised his head and looked at the densely packed cocoon-like ellipsoidal objects hanging on the wall. Will there be some big insects inside? Zhang Yi was still a little scared, to be honest. People have an instinctive disgust for insects. If he really peeled it open and saw the big bugs crawling out of it, with green mucus flowing all over his body, he would vomit all the food he had eaten the previous night. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Yi decided to get one and take a look. He would do it once and for all. He walked along the broken corridor to a cocoon, cut off its branches with his sword, and then successfully put it into his alternate space. After completing this step, Zhang Yi did not hesitate at all, and decisively opened the double doors and left the abandoned building. He was not in a hurry to study the things he had obtained. After all, he was not good at it. So Zhang Yi returned to the car and pretended to rest, but he did not sleep all night. The very next day, no one had encountered any zombie, and this scene was too weird. At the beginning, everyone expected a large-scale zombie group to attack immediately when almost every person in the entire Tianhai city had gathered at the location of the snow worship sect. However, after a day and a night, no one had even seen a single hair of a zombie. And since the zombies had not appeared, it only meant that they had been alerted to their plan, so they halted their actions. That morning, everyone gathered behind the church again to discuss the matter. The zombies suddenly stopped moving. Either they retreated, or they noticed our actions and were secretly planning something. Now, I have to consider that the wisdom of the zombie king may be much higher than we thought. Zhang Yi shared his thoughts, and it was the same as everyone. With her arms folded, Xiao Honglian frowned and added with dissatisfaction. The intelligence displayed by these strange creatures is really too high. I would believe it if there were humans guiding them from behind. So, if they don't show up, do we have to stay here all the time? No one had an answer to her question, and after a brief silence, Bian Junwu asked calmly, "Are there any news from your respective bases?" Everyone shook their heads. No, the base is unusually quiet. Although our people have moved underground, there are also surveillance cameras on the ground. But no zombies were found. Zhang Yi replied. Then, he suddenly thought of something and turned his gaze towards Bian Junwu. Could it be because you killed a corpse king? The existence of the corpse king was obviously special. It could be said to be the core of a group of zombies. And once the corpse king dies, the zombie group formed with it as the center will lose order. Now, it can also be concluded that there must be more than one intelligent corpse king in Tianhai City. Perhaps there is some special connection between them. Because one corpse king was killed, the others had become alert. Bian Junwu's face was expressionless. He just said to everyone calmly, "This is just the beginning. Maybe the zombies are still watching, and all we have to do is wait patiently. This is exactly like fishing. It depends on who is more patient, the fisherman or the fish. After all, no plan was absolutely perfect, and it was made based on the intelligence they have obtained so far. So, if the plan fails, then they will just try another way." Later that very day, Zhang Yi took out the things he found to show it to his team. After knowing that Zhang Yi had entered the forbidden area of the snow worship sect, everyone was a little nervous and curious. The feeling of prying into other people's secrets was particularly exciting. Zhang Yi took out the red fruit, branches and leaves, and the cocoon from his alternate space. When he took out the cocoon, the expressions on the faces of everyone present was obviously a little strange, because of the size of the cocoon. It looked like a person was wrapped inside. Zhang Yi said to Zhou Qir, "Zhou Qir, you are more familiar with using a knife here, so you will be responsible for cutting them open." Zhang Yi also provided her with any tools in the laboratory she might need, so she could completely dissect and study them. But Zhou Qi told him that these fruits and branches must be returned to the laboratory in the shelter for extensive research, because the environment here was not suitable for such research. However, this cocoon is a little strange. It looks like a mummy. As soon as she said this, everyone nodded and agreed with her statement. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Let's cut it open first. Maybe things are not that mysterious." Zhou Qi nodded. She took out the knife from the many sharp knives that were in her medical tool bag. She picked up one, and her slender palm very steadily cut the dark green leaves from the head. Sure enough, after cutting open the leaves, a skinny corpse appeared inside. Zhang Yi recalled that there were thousands of such corpses hanging densely on the wall in the abandoned building, and he immediately knew the function of the plant. "So that's it," Zhang Yi explained in the puzzled eyes of the crowd. "There is a huge mutant plant in the abandoned building. I believe it absorbs nutrients from the corpse and then produces this kind of red fruit." Hearing this, Liang Yu continued, "We also saw many snow worshippers eating this red fruit. This is probably the source of their food. In other words, their forbidden area is actually a living granary. No wonder they are so careful and don't allow any outsiders to get close." After learning the truth, everyone inevitably felt a bit relieved that it wasn't some conspiracy. And they have no shortage of food, so no one was interested in the mutant plant that can feed thousands of people. Zhou Qi poked the corpse with a scalpel and found that it had been completely squeezed dry, without a trace of blood and flesh left. It seems that the corpse has indeed been completely transformed into nutrients. Zhang Yi said to Zhou Qi again, "After you go back, analyze the composition of this fruit and its branches and leaves to see if there is anything abnormal." Zhang Yi actually lost interest in the plant. It was just out of his usual caution that he told Zhou Qi. Zhou Qi nodded and replied, "Give me some time. This plant is very easy to study. I'll make a slice and observe it with a microscope and biological reagents." On the investigation team side, Meng Xiu took off her white gloves after she was done dissecting the corpse inside the cocoon they brought from their visit from the Sect's forbidden area. After fully examining the corpse, she said to Bian Junwu and everyone in their team who were nearby, "It's just a corpse that has been drained of nutrients. There is nothing abnormal about it. As for the fruit it produces, it has some hallucinogenic effects, which can help the high-ranking officials of the Snow Worship Sect to better control their believers. But no pathogens were found, and the sugar content is quite high. It should be considered a nutritious food." Bian Junwu pushed his dark toad-shaped sunglasses and replied that part he knew. "When we go back, take some of the rhizomes and see if the experts in the laboratory can cultivate it. This thing is very useful." Meanwhile, deep in the abandoned building, Zhang Yixin stood in front of the blood vine and looked up at the cocoons hanging upside down and began counting. 3968, 3969, 3970. One less. And as he sighed heavily, he immediately knew that there was an intruder last night. Suddenly, his expression became dark. "There is one missing again." It seems that they were so curious. The next day, there was still no trace of the corpse group, and this made everyone feel more and more gloomy. The less the corpse group appeared, the more likely it was that they were brewing a terrorist attack. Bian Junwu has already mobilized the resources of the Jiangnan district and used their satellites to monitor the entire Tianhai city, trying to find the movements of the zombies. Finally, with the help of high technology, they really found clues. Bian Junwu called everyone over and told them the latest news. The zombies are gathering, and they are gathering in this direction. Preliminary estimates showed that the number is at least 100,000. You must be prepared. This is a tough battle. 100,000? This number made everyone frown, momentarily speechless.